Mark worked at the local bookstore, surrounded by stories but not really living his own. He was comfortable, maybe too comfortable. That's probably why Sarah was such a jolt to his system. She was a regular, always bouncing in with a bright smile and a stack of books, usually fantasy or adventure. He always called her trouble, jokingly, of course. It started the first time she accidentally knocked over a display of bestsellers while trying to reach a book on the top shelf. Oops. Sorry, Mark. I'm just a little enthusiastic, she'd said, her eyes sparkling with mischief. He'd laughed, and the nickname stuck. Sarah was sunshine personified. She'd leave little notes hidden in books for him to find later, silly jokes or drawings of dragons. She'd challenge him to impromptu trivia contests about obscure authors. Everything with her was a game, a playful dance. He'd tease her back, calling her a menace to the orderly stacks and a distraction from his quiet reading. But it was all innocent. He knew she was just a kid, a whirlwind of teenage energy. He was a bit older, a bit more grounded. He enjoyed her company, the way she lit up the bookstore, but he never thought of her as anything more than a fun, younger friend. He appreciated her spirit, the way she embraced life with such enthusiasm. And, maybe secretly, he liked being called Mark with that special, slightly breathless tone she used. One time, Sarah swapped all the romance novels to the mystery section, and vice versa. Mark had spent a whole morning redirecting confused customers looking for swooning heroes in the wrong aisle. When he finally caught her, she was hiding behind a bookshelf, giggling uncontrollably. It was just a little switcheroo, she'd exclaimed, batting her eyelashes innocently. He couldn't help but laugh, even as he mentally prepared for the avalanche of returns. Another time, she organized a flash mob in the bookstore, convincing a group of her friends to suddenly start singing a song from Mark's favorite musical. He'd been mortified at first, but the sheer joy on her face, and the genuine enthusiasm of the singers, had melted his annoyance away. He even found himself humming along by the end. These little moments were their normal. A constant back and forth of playful teasing, harmless pranks, and shared laughter. He'd feign exasperation, rolling his eyes and muttering about her chaotic energy, but secretly, he loved it. The bookstore felt a little brighter, a little more alive, whenever she was around. He knew she looked forward to their interactions too. There was a certain sparkle in her eyes whenever she teased him, a silent challenge that he always accepted with a smile. He was like the grumpy old wizard, and she was the mischievous apprentice, constantly testing his patience but ultimately bringing joy to his otherwise mundane existence. The air in the bookstore shifted subtly a few weeks ago. Sarah had been unusually quiet, browsing the shelves with a thoughtful expression instead of her usual boisterous energy. When Mark asked her what was wrong, she just shrugged and said, "Big day coming up." He knew instantly what she meant, her birthday. The big one. 18. She'd mentioned it in passing before, always with a playful glint in her eye. "Just you wait, Mark," she'd said once, "everything changes when I'm 18. He'd brushed it off with a laugh, assuming she was just referring to being able to vote or buy lottery tickets. But now, seeing her quieter demeanor, he wondered if she meant something more. The invitation to her birthday party arrived a few days later, tucked inside a copy of Pride and Prejudice, a not-so-subtle hint, perhaps? It was a simple, handwritten card addressed to Mark, the grumpiest wizard I know. He smiled at the nickname, but a flicker of unease crept in. He wasn't sure if he should go. It felt different than their usual bookstore banter. This was a real-life event, a celebration of her officially becoming an adult. And something about that made him nervous. He propped the invitation up on his desk at home, staring at it for hours. Part of him wanted to go, to see her celebrate and share in her joy. But another part of him worried about crossing a line, about changing the dynamic of their relationship in a way he wasn't sure he was ready for. 18. It echoed in his mind, a turning point he couldn't ignore. Mark was 23. It wasn't a massive age gap, but it felt like one. He remembered being 18, full of naive dreams and a reckless sense of invincibility. Sarah was on the cusp of that, about to step into a world he already felt a little jaded by. He'd been working at the bookstore for 5 years, content in his routine of quiet reading and predictable interactions. Sarah was anything but predictable. He wasn't sure what was holding him back. Was it the age difference? The fear of ruining their friendship? Or something else, something deeper that he wasn't ready to acknowledge? He'd caught himself staring at her more than once lately, noticing the way the sunlight caught in her hair, the curve of her smile, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about something she was passionate about. These weren't the observations of a friend. They were something more. But acting on those feelings felt wrong. She was still so young, so full of potential. He didn't want to be the one to complicate her life, to introduce her to the messy realities of adulthood before she was ready. He knew relationships with age gaps could work, but he also knew they came with challenges. And he wasn't sure he was equipped to handle those challenges, especially with someone as vibrant and full of life as Sarah. The invitation seemed to mock him, sitting there on his desk, a constant reminder of the internal battle raging inside him. Go. Don't go. The decision felt monumental, like it would change the course of both their lives. The music pulsed through the walls of Sarah's house, a chaotic blend of pop and electronic beats. Mark felt ancient the moment he stepped inside. Teenagers swarmed everywhere, laughing, dancing, and taking selfies. He recognized a few faces from the bookstore, kids who occasionally came in to buy graphic novels or the latest young adult fiction. But mostly, he felt like an intruder, an observer from another planet. He spotted Sarah across the room, surrounded by a group of friends. She was wearing a sparkly dress that showed off her shoulders, and her hair was styled in loose waves. She looked different. More grown up, more confident. He realized with a jolt that she wasn't just the playful girl who pulled pranks in the bookstore anymore. She was becoming a woman. He stood awkwardly near the snack table, nursing a can of soda and trying to blend into the background. He felt a tap on his shoulder and turned to see one of Sarah's friends, a girl with bright pink hair and multiple piercings. "You're Mark, right? The bookstore guy?" she asked, her voice surprisingly soft. He nodded. "Sarah told me you were coming. She's really happy you're here." Mark felt a strange mix of relief and anxiety. Happy he was there? Or happy he was witnessing her transformation? He watched her laugh with her friends, a carefree, genuine laugh that he knew so well. But tonight, it felt different. It felt like a goodbye to the innocent friendship they had shared, and a hello to something new and unknown. He suddenly wished he hadn't come. He was just adding to his own confusion. As the evening wore on, the party started to wind down. Some of the teenagers had already left, heading off to other parties or back home. The music was turned down a notch, and the atmosphere became a little less frenetic. Mark saw his chance to slip away unnoticed. He'd made his appearance, paid his respects, and endured the awkwardness. Now, he just wanted to go home and lose himself in a book, anything to escape the swirling emotions in his head. He found Sarah standing near the doorway, talking to another girl. He waited for a break in the conversation and then approached her. "Hey," he said, feeling ridiculously self-conscious. "I should probably get going." It was a lively party. Sarah smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Leaving already?" she asked, her voice a little softer than usual. "Yeah, well, it's getting late," he mumbled, avoiding eye contact. "And I have to open the bookstore tomorrow." There was a brief silence, and Mark could feel her gaze on him. He finally looked up and saw a hint of sadness in her expression. "Okay," she said quietly. "Thanks for coming." He hesitated, wanting to say something more, something meaningful. But the words caught in his throat. He just nodded awkwardly and turned to leave. As he walked out the door, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was disappointing her, that he was leaving something important unsaid. He knew he'd made the right decision to leave, but it didn't make it feel any less wrong. Back at his apartment, Mark couldn't shake the image of Sarah's sad smile. He tried to read, but the words blurred on the page. He paced around his small living room, restless and uneasy. He kept replaying their brief conversation in his head, wondering if he should have said something different, something more honest. He told himself he was being ridiculous. She was just a teenager, and he was overthinking everything. But the feeling persisted, a nagging sense that he'd missed an opportunity, that he'd let her down in some way. He considered calling her, but quickly dismissed the idea. What would he even say? "Sorry, I was so awkward at your party?" That wouldn't fix anything. He was just about to give up on reading and turn on the TV when he heard a knock at the door. He frowned, wondering who could be visiting him at this hour. He wasn't expecting anyone. He glanced through the peephole, and his heart skipped a beat. Standing on his doorstep was Sarah. She wasn't wearing the sparkly dress from the party anymore. Instead, she had on a short, black dress that showed off her legs. Her hair was still styled in waves, but her makeup was a little smudged, as if she'd been crying. She looked both vulnerable and incredibly confident. He took a deep breath and opened the door. His mind raced, trying to understand why she was here, at his apartment, so late at night. The air crackled with unspoken tension. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Mark stood frozen in the doorway, his mind struggling to catch up with the reality of Sarah standing before him. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Sarah took a step forward, closing the distance between them. The porch light cast long shadows, highlighting the curve of her legs and the determined set of her jaw. Her eyes, though slightly red-rimmed, held a spark of something he hadn't seen before, a challenge, a confidence that bordered on defiance. "You were right," she said, her voice low and husky. The words hung in the air, laden with unspoken meaning. He frowned, confused. "Right about what?" he managed to ask, his voice barely a whisper. She took another step, closing the gap even further. He could smell her perfume, a sweet, floral scent that was both familiar and intoxicating. "You always said I was trouble," she said, her gaze locking with his. "Flirty, teasing, but innocent." She paused, letting the words sink in. Then, she delivered the line that shattered the playful facade they had both maintained for so long. "I am trouble," she said, her voice gaining strength. "And now I'm legal." She punctuated the statement by stepping even closer, her body almost touching his. The air crackled with an undeniable, electric charge. Mark's mind was a whirlwind. He felt like he'd been plunged into ice water, every nerve ending screaming with awareness. He stammered, trying to find the right words, but all that came out was a shaky, "Sarah." He couldn't deny the attraction that surged through him, a potent mix of desire and fear. He had always been drawn to her energy, her spirit, but he'd kept those feelings carefully locked away, hidden beneath layers of playful banter and platonic friendship. Now, she was throwing those feelings back at him, daring him to acknowledge them. He took a step back, creating a little more space between them. He needed to think, to regain control of the situation. What does that mean?" he asked, his voice still unsteady. Sarah's expression softened slightly, but her gaze remained unwavering. "It means," she said, her voice a little softer now, "that I'm not just a kid anymore, Mark. I'm not just trouble in the way you used to joke about. I'm ready for more." He saw a vulnerability in her eyes, a plea for him to see her as a woman, as someone capable of making her own choices. He knew he was at a crossroads. He could either dismiss her statement as a teenage whim, a moment of rebellion, or he could acknowledge the truth that had been simmering beneath the surface for so long, that he wanted her, and that she might want him too. The weight of the decision pressed down on him, heavy and unavoidable. "More than what, Sarah?" Mark finally asked, the question laced with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. He watched her carefully, trying to gauge her intentions, to understand what she truly wanted from him. "More than just pranks and jokes," she replied, her voice steady despite the slight tremor in her hands. "More than just a friendly face at the bookstore. I want you to see me, Mark. Really see me." He knew what she meant. He'd been seeing her, in fragments, for months now. He'd seen her kindness, her intelligence, her passion for life. But he'd always held back, afraid of crossing a line, afraid of ruining what they had. "I do see you, Sarah," he said, his voice softer now, more sincere. "I see. I see how amazing you are." A faint smile flickered across her lips. "Then what's stopping you?" she challenged, her eyes searching his. "What's stopping you from admitting that maybe, just maybe, you feel something too?" He hesitated. The truth was, he was terrified. He was afraid of hurting her, afraid of making the wrong decision, afraid of the consequences. But he was also afraid of losing her, of letting this moment slip away and regretting it forever. I don't know," he confessed, his voice barely audible. "I'm scared, okay? I'm scared of messing things up." Sarah reached out and gently touched his arm, her touch sending a jolt of electricity through him. "It's okay to be scared," she said softly. "But you can't let fear control you, Mark. You have to take a chance, or you'll never know what could have been." Mark closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath and trying to still the frantic beating of his heart. He thought back to a few weeks ago, when Sarah had organized a book drive for a local children's hospital. He'd been impressed by her dedication, her genuine desire to help others. He remembered the way her face had lit up when they'd delivered the books, the pure joy in her eyes. That was the moment he knew his feelings for her were more than just friendly. He also recalled a time when she had confided in him about her anxieties about college, her fears about leaving home and facing the unknown. He'd been touched by her vulnerability, her willingness to share her insecurities with him. He'd offered her words of encouragement, drawing on his own experiences, and he'd felt a deep connection with her, a sense of shared understanding. He opened his eyes and looked at Sarah, really looked at her. He saw not just the playful girl he'd always known, but a strong, intelligent, and compassionate young woman. He saw someone who was ready to take on the world, someone who was capable of making her own decisions. And he realized that he couldn't let his fear hold him back any longer. "Okay," he said, his voice now firm and resolute. "Okay, Sarah. I feel something too. I've been trying to ignore it, trying to convince myself that it's not real. But it is. I do feel something for you." He reached out and took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. I don't want to hurt you." Sarah squeezed his hand gently. "I know," she said, her voice soft. "I don't want to hurt you either, Mark. But sometimes, the things that scare us the most are the things that are worth fighting for." He looked at her, her eyes shining with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. He knew she was right. He couldn't let fear dictate his life. He had to be brave, for both of them. "So," he said, taking a deep breath. "What happens now?" He wasn't sure what the next step was, what she expected from him. But he was willing to find out. Sarah smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that lit up her entire face. It was the smile he'd been waiting to see all night, the smile that had always drawn him to her in the first place. "That," she said, her voice playful once again, "is up to you." She leaned in closer, her lips just a breath away from his. He could feel her warmth, her energy, her undeniable pull. He closed his eyes, surrendering to the moment. He knew this was a turning point, a moment that would change everything. He just had to decide which path to take. Would he step forward, embracing the unknown, or would he step back, retreating to the safety of his familiar world? The choice was his, and his alone. He knew he had to choose wisely. Their future depended on it. He made his choice. He leaned in, closing the remaining space between them, and gently kissed her. It was a tentative kiss at first, a soft exploration of her lips, a silent question. But as she responded, her arms wrapping around his neck, the kiss deepened, becoming more passionate, more urgent. He felt a surge of relief, a sense of rightness that washed away all his doubts and fears. But then, a flicker of doubt resurfaced. He pulled back slightly, breaking the kiss. He looked at Sarah, her eyes glazed with desire, and he saw a hint of vulnerability, a need for reassurance. He knew he couldn't just give in to his desires without considering the consequences. Sarah, he said softly, his voice a little shaky. This is a big decision. Are you sure this is what you want? He needed to hear her say it, to be certain that she was making this choice with her eyes open, knowing the potential risks involved. Sarah looked at him, her expression serious. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, she said, her voice firm. I know it might be complicated, and I know there will be challenges. But I'm willing to face them if you are. He looked into her eyes, and he saw a strength and a determination that mirrored his own. He knew that this wouldn't be easy, but he also knew that he couldn't walk away from this. He couldn't deny the feelings that had been growing between them for so long. He had to take a chance, and trust that they could make it work. He smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile. Then, he said, taking her hand again. Let's be trouble together. The following weeks were a whirlwind. They navigated the complexities of their new relationship carefully, aware of the potential pitfalls. They had long conversations about their expectations, their fears, and their hopes for the future. They faced judgment from some of their friends and acquaintances, whispers and disapproving glances that stung, but they found strength in each other. Sarah's parents were initially skeptical, but after seeing how happy she was and how genuinely Mark cared for her, they slowly came around. Mark made an effort to get to know them, to show them that he was responsible and trustworthy. There were moments of doubt, moments when Mark questioned whether he'd made the right decision. He worried about holding Sarah back, about stifling her growth and potential. But then he'd see her smile, hear her laugh, and he knew that he couldn't imagine his life without her. Sarah, in turn, helped Mark to embrace life more fully. She encouraged him to step outside of his comfort zone, to take risks, to pursue his dreams. She reminded him that life was meant to be lived, not just observed from the sidelines. They learned to communicate openly and honestly, to support each other through thick and thin. They discovered that their age difference wasn't a barrier, but a bridge, a way to learn from each other's experiences and perspectives. Their relationship wasn't perfect, but it was real, and it was strong. They had chosen to be trouble together, and they were determined to make it work. A year later, Mark and Sarah were back at the bookstore. Sarah was home from her first year of college, her eyes sparkling with excitement as she recounted her adventures. She'd joined the debate team, aced her history exams, and even learned how to cook, sort of. Mark listened intently, his arm around her shoulders, a silent testament to their enduring connection. He was no longer just the quiet bookstore worker, content in his routine. Sarah had dragged him out of his shell, encouraging him to take a pottery class, to try new foods, to travel to new places. He was more alive, more engaged with the world, thanks to her. So, he said, teasingly, still think you're trouble? Sarah grinned, a mischievous glint in her eyes. Always, she said, leaning in to kiss him. But now you're my partner in crime. He chuckled, pulling her closer. He knew their relationship wouldn't always be easy, but he also knew that they could face anything together. They had built something special, something strong, something that was worth fighting for. And as they stood there, surrounded by the stories of countless others, they knew that their own story was just beginning. The bookstore, once a place of quiet solitude for Mark, was now a shared space, filled with love, laughter, and the promise of a future filled with adventure, together.